My name is David Widgington. I'm 61 years old. I now live in Montreal, and I'm from Montreal originally. I grew up in a suburban on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River in a suburban context. I guess lower middle class, working class. Situation. I have two brothers and two sisters. My two parents are now deceased. We grew up in an Anglophone household, but in a bilingual environment, meaning I spoke English and French pretty much every single day. I went to school in French, but we spoke English at home. It probably started I guess in my undergrad years, but even as a kid, wasn't necessarily politics, but it was more social elements, because my parents did some work organizing like food distributions at Christmas and things like that. So they're part of an organization that did these sort of things. And as a kid, we often tagged along and observed. So I assume that had an impact on myself, on my upbringing. Although, if I look at my siblings, we're not all the same, because other things come along throughout the life that even goes you deeper and deeper. But I guess politics probably started during my undergrad years at university. I studied geography and geography, because it's environmental, has a lot like an important environment component to geography, just as an element that's just part of geography in itself, without actually having to think about it as a political thing. It becomes political when you start to look at environmental factors and the human impact on environment and everything else. So I think that was an initial understanding. I remember at one point, because we used to receive National Geographic as one of the journals in our department, and I remember one year there was a McDonald's ad on the back of the National Geographic magazine, and it was like in a holographic state, because I think that was new at that point, to be able to print in holographic. And I remember myself and some of my friends and students, we were taken aback. It's like, well, why is there a McDonald's ad on a National Geographic magazine? It just didn't make sense. So we eventually wrote a letter to the director of National Geographic, and so that might have been an initial act of protest, I guess. And also at the time, there was a construction a project by the provincial government to construct a new contemporary art museum, and that was at a time where they're cutting a lot of services and various other things, and there was a student strike at the time, and one of the protests was we went to the hole in the ground that was to become this contemporary art museum. So those are other elements that kind of politicized me as well. But I think the biggest event came, I guess, much later, was in 2001 during the Summit of the Americas protest, or the Summit of the Americas in Quebec City. That's like when all the countries, all the leaders of the different countries from North and South America, except Cuba, because they weren't allowed to come. The event took place in Quebec City, and there was a mass movement of students and anarchists and social groups and from all over North America. But because it was located so close to, within Quebec, a lot of people from here, there was a lot of grassroots movement to go there and protest. And I went there as a photographer to photograph and document the event. And it was extreme. It was the first time that one of these international meetings, whether it's WTO and all that, where they actually fenced in the central area of the meetings. After that, it became like a standard practice. But the first time that happened was in Quebec City, where they built a fence around the central part of the city, and no one was allowed inside unless you had like an ID card with your address or something. So, and there was a huge amount of police. There was the military was there, the provincial police were there, the city police were there, and police from Montreal also went there. So there was like a massive presence of oppression, and the number of tear gas that was used was like unbelievable. The amount of rubber bullets, because it was all documented, was like beyond anything that had ever that we'd ever seen before in Quebec. So it was a huge politicization period for me and for a lot of other people as well. I actually even published a book about it, published and edited a book about it with different contributors who talked about various aspects of it. And I guess after that, or directly related to that, because what are they called? Indie media was new at that point after the WTO in Seattle. So in Quebec City this time was the first Quebecois version of indie media was created for those protests, and afterwards it obviously continued. We created a collective to provide video activists collective called Les Lucioles, which is fireflies, in order to provide video content, activist video content for indie media. But the collective ended up growing beyond the indie media website to actually, we hosted our own screening events every single month with videos that we filmed of activist movements and protests and actions that happened locally or sometimes internationally, because some of us traveled, or sometimes we received video from others that we edited and created a short film with it. And this, like, so 2002 was when the collective started. So this is like 3 years prior to YouTube. So YouTube didn't exist then. So it showed that there was a definite need for people to congregate together and view these films together. And one thing that was super interesting about that was, because we filmed actions and activists and whatever throughout the month, all of those people came to see themselves and to see the videos about themselves. So our events became also meeting points for activists of various issues that might not have met each other otherwise. So it became a really exciting period for me and for a lot of others. And it lasted 5 years. The collective lasted 5 years before people kind of dispersed. So I think each screening we created initially was VHS, which is really funny to think about. So we created a VHS of the screening prior to the screening, so that people could buy the VHSs or DVDs afterwards at the screenings itself. So that would help us finance what we did and give them a chance to bring stuff home and then share it, to a larger audience. So that was a very, very dynamic period post Quebec City, because there was a lot of international, like WTO, the IMF. There was meetings all over the place and all the time, and there was every so often there was regular meeting in Montreal. So there were lots of protests and blockages and actions and stuff related to all of these globalization or anti-globalization protests at the time. It's probably relates to post Summit of the Americas, because the Black Bloc. There was a Black Bloc presence there. There was I'm having a blank now. There was a group in Montreal. I think it still exists, in some kind of form, called the CLAC, CLAC, which is le Convergence de la lutte anticapitaliste. So the anti-capitalist struggle convergence. So that was created to create like some kind of organization to go to the Summit of the Americas, and it continued to organize afterwards, for all of these other anti-globalization protests and events that happened in Montreal and elsewhere, in Ottawa and in Toronto as well. There was a lot of them happening in those days. They don't exist anymore so much. They don't really happen in the same way. It's more bilateral or unilateral things that kind of events that happen now. And then they started to hold them at more and more, let's say, distant places. I think there was the G7 was held just last month or the month before in Alberta, in like a Kananaskis, which is like way out in the mountains. So it's hard to organize. They stopped holding these things in urban centers. So it kind of died out, the usefulness of protesting. So after the Summit of the Americas, the CLAC had regular meetings. So I even though I never became a member, I kind of generally never become members of organizations. I'm not sure why, but I often like to go to their meetings, and I do participate, and I do go, and I guess I join activist things in my own way, in my or with through another collective or something, because I guess I'm less interested in let's say the political structures of organizing than the organizing itself. I like to organize in smaller groups, and let's say like at the Summit of the Americas, for example, there were thousands of people who we all slept in the gymnasium of the university there, and there was all like open democracy where everyone can say what they want, and these kind of meetings, as we all know, they take forever. But that's okay. I'm not against that type of organizing, but I prefer to organize in a much smaller group, and do we do our own thing, or sometimes I do my own thing myself, whether it's postering or things. So I guess those kinds of meetings, where there's direct democracy, and that was probably my, I guess, a formal kind of introduction, or informal, or I don't know if that's not really formal, I guess, but I've never I'm not a big reader of anarchist theory, although I'm familiar with it, but I don't go out and get the books, and I've read some stuff, but I'm not like, I don't know, I can't distinguish, let's say, between Bakunin and all these others, because I guess I'm not that type of anarchist, and I don't even consider myself an anarchist. What was the term that was used? Anarchist affiliate, or anarchist? What was the
adjacent
term that you used? Adjacent. Yeah. So I guess I'm more anarchist adjacent in my approach to political activism and organizing and stuff. Yeah, and I guess I'm more influenced, let's say, by DIY culture and maybe punk culture and stuff, than the actual like deep politics of anarchism. But they're often both very closely aligned, I think. Well, I guess initially I would make a distinction between the word chaos and anarchy, which is the largest confused, like misinterpreted link of the two, because anarchism is supposed to be is actually quite organized. It's not all over the place, although it could be, but it could be organized in smaller groups. But it's usually quite organized, sometimes too organized, or whatever. But so I would start with that. Distinguish, like, anarchism is not chaos, first of all, and like I said earlier, I would probably talk about anti-oppression of all kinds, and people understand that very easily, because everyone I think everyone or most people have felt some kind of oppression at some point in their life, whether it's real oppression or it's felt oppression. Because sometimes, cis white folks, they feel as though they're sometimes oppressed, but it's so minor or it's so individual that it's not really an oppression. It's just a feeling or whatever. So I guess I would describe or I would talk about oppression of various kinds, whether it's homophobia or racism or whatever, like there's a whole gamut of oppressions that are pretty obvious, and maybe give some historical examples and things like that. So I think that people understand what oppression is. You could even talk about real like examples that are happening like right now that people could know about locally, internationally, but there's no shortage of examples. And I think people understand what that is. And anarchists is, well, the way I see it is anarchy is in opposition to that, like deliberate opposition, not accidental. It's done on, it's a choice of actively oppressing. Sorry, of actively opposing oppressive forces that, so that I'd probably introduce someone in that way. Also, the DIY punk element is also, I think, an important part of anarchy or of anarchist ideas that go beyond the politics. It's the way of doing things, of not waiting for others or systems or governments or whatever to do things for you. Is do it yourself. It's things can get done better and more quickly and more appropriately for the situation or the group or whatever, to do it yourself as much as possible. But that's not saying that if there's resources out there that the government makes available that you can't go and get. Because I know some anarchists are like, don't like the government is, you don't even go there ever. You don't apply for grants if they're government grants because it's the government. But me, if I see that if the government has money to offer, go for it. I have no issue against that. So I don't know if, as far as like anarchist theory, if that contradicts some anarchist theory, I don't know, but to me it doesn't matter. Because in theory, the government isn't mine, but the resources that they have belongs to me and everyone else. So if it's there and it's available, I'll go and get it if I can. So yeah, and the idea that diversity of tactics is I don't know, I assume it's part of anarchist theory or anarchist, but I don't know which theory or whatever, because like I said before, I don't follow the specific theories, but diversity of tactics is something that's often used in activist circles, that's often mixed, with like Black Bloc organizing and just general activist organizing. Although a lot of activists, either they're not familiar with the idea or they have a difficulty in not agreeing with tactics that they don't agree with. Well, maybe I'm not saying that clearly. They have trouble accepting tactics that make them uncomfortable, I guess. But I go 100% with diversity of tactics. I don't need to agree with what they're doing at all. I don't in activist context, I don't try to satisfy the popular acceptance. I don't care if the media talks badly about an action or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. It's just that there's action taking place. So any kind of action or any kind of tactic that's used to fight oppressive forces is fine. So that would be another thing that I would share with someone who doesn't know about anarchy. What else? I guess, horizontality. There's no boss. people take on roles. So there could be, let's say, like in our video activist collective, we had a role which in French is called batteur de cul, which means ass kicker, which someone could be confused with someone like taking on a role of being a boss, but it's not being a boss. It's just your role is to make sure that everyone's doing their thing. It's like to contact everyone as the project is going, saying, "Have you done this yet?" "No." "Well, hurry up," because this other person. So it's more of an overseer as opposed to being in charge. So it's still horizontal, but everyone agrees on everyone else's role in the project or whatever that the group is working on. And to me, that's one of the fundamental parts of anarchism, is the horizontality of it all. Well, contemporary is changing so fast at the moment. It's like it's in hyperdrive, it seems. But one of the things that is important in, let's say, in periods like at the moment where oppression or oppressive forces and even fascist, fascism is on the rise. It's not even faking it anymore. It's not even pretending to be anything else. It's actually coming out and raising their arm. We've seen like Elon Musk and groups in Italy openly, marching and giving the Nazi salute in public. So, and with all the roundups in LA and elsewhere in the United States of migrants and anyone who looks like a migrant potentially, or anyone crossing the border that might not have the right document, or someone who's crossing the border, but they might not look like the gender that's written in their passport, or other things like that. It's becoming dangerous for people just in their everyday lives. So in that setting, things might be less intense in Canada, but there's a lot of similar laws that are going through, that our new prime minister, like immigration laws and stuff, that's making it easier to deport people and things like that, are starting to just voted in last week, for example. So it might be like less intense here, but it's not. It's still following the similar patterns of fascist or right-wing processes. So community building is key, because it reduces individual vulnerability in any situation. So in times of fascism and unhindered fascism, some people are in immediate danger. They're suddenly in danger, like trans people in the US, for example. Suddenly they're the danger level, which was always there for trans people, but now it's like it's increased exponentially, because I think there's a new law in the US that the police can subpoena doctors who might be assisting trans people getting care, for example. So by organizing and collectivizing the organizing and caring for people in smaller localized groups, because it's the state that's doing a lot of the oppression, and like anarchist ideas and anarchist processes become extremely useful, where people make decisions together themselves, do things like to protect themselves. So in that context, I think anarchist ideas and self-organizing and creating protective forces within the smaller communities to protect everyone within the groups from outside factors in however form that takes, I think is an anarchist idea that is extremely useful, that could be extremely useful and should be should be promoted right now, and I think it is. And we see examples of it in LA, where communities come out and block all of these ICE vehicles, and ICE police and whatever, trying to go just grab people off the street, or grab people at their work, or grab people as the kids are coming out of school, or whatever. So we see examples of it already in contemporary circumstances. I'm not one to go out and try and sell an ideology to others, because I think it's not a waste of time. If someone is into it or is better at it than I would be, because I don't think I'd be very good at it, then they should go for it. It's the whole diversity of tactics thing. But I think it's better. My energy would be better used in the organizing, and let's say, instead of going while organizing, let's say locally in the city block. Let's say I want to organize my city block. We might, because we already know some people on the block, for example, who were already like somewhat aligned politically, but who might be more vulnerable than others and stuff. So by talking locally with people and maybe organizing a picnic, or in the alleyway or something, and having people come, to me, it's a more direct way, and it's a way that I'm not convincing someone's political ideology, but we're more talking about our community relationship, and the things that we're already aligned with. Let's say access to hospitals, or access to food, or access to whatever, to safety, or prevention of the police to access certain areas, or to access alley, or access to, or whatever it would be. To me, that would be a better strategy for me personally, because I'm not a very good salesman, especially when it comes to political ideology, because it's a hard sell, because political ideology usually comes down through generations. So it's like a cultural thing that's hard to get rid of, cultural baggage that's been there forever. So it would be more through organizing and getting to know people, and talking about processes of organizing, or how collectivity and small groups work better. If we know each other, we could help each other better. So I talk about that more with people that I know now here, that are, let's say, more alone, or don't have like a social network. For example, we have a Signal group of longtime friends who live not necessarily in the same block, but in a larger neighborhood. So to me, that's a great idea of organizing, or just staying in touch and sharing, articles, and saying, oh, we're having a barbecue, why don't you guys all come over, or whatever, because that builds community. It's also localized, so it's geographically important, because it's hard yes, you can create community internationally, but as far as organizing and using anarchist ideas to actually do real protection and real support and stuff, local is always better. So I think that's, to me, that would be the best way to change people's minds, by doing stuff together, and by helping people who are vulnerable, who might not disagree with you because for whatever reason on a political level, but they'll definitely be happy that you help them out, and they'll respect your ideas because they've seen you be useful to them, or be helpful, or be kind, or whatever, or protect them, or I don't know what, whatever the circumstances, because there's so many variabilities possible. But to me, that would be the best way. But I guess as an artist, I actually consider myself, I like to call myself an undisciplinary artivist, because it's a play on words with or non-disciplinary art, but I'm an undisciplined artist. Yeah, so I think art is also a hugely useful way of sharing ideas, of sharing like political ideas and regrouping people and just like exposing people to things that they might not otherwise. And I guess like art, yes, but not in the art gallery or art museum context, which is like more an elitist type situation. But art, as in making posters and like posting around your neighborhood to inform people about a circumstance, or even graffiti or doing graffiti or stenciling around a neighborhood. I think it's important, or even organizing, let's say, ad hoc art shows, which could be outdoors, or it could be in a space that's up for rent, or a vacant lot that's just you can take over, or things like that. Because I think art has always played a useful role in just political expression. Or even social expression, or oppositional expression, and yeah. And one thing I like to think about is what I've coined as oppositional cultural heritage, in the sense, like the raised fist, for example, or the image of a hand throwing a brick or a Molotov cocktail. Those are images that anarchists for sure will recognize. Activists even larger will recognize, but even the general public recognizes, a hand or a figure throwing a Molotov. They might not agree with it because they might think it's way too violent, but they'll recognize it as resistance, or maybe not. They might see it as an attack as well. But that doesn't matter to me as an artist. But all of these things, if people see those more often, like these symbols that are very recognizable, and they're part of what I call oppositional culture. That's part of anyone who practices oppositional culture. It's part of our heritage. So it's just like let's say a museum that shows I don't know, paintings from the 20th or 19th century or whatever, that show this is your heritage, because it's talking about history or whatever. These images, even though they're more ephemeral because they're on posters or they're flyers or things that disappear, or zines and stuff like that, they disappear. They often, after an event is over or whatever, you don't see them anymore. And I'm an archivist of these things. And I think those are hugely important to share, because people, it's a way for, let's say in a community context where you do a poster campaign, even if it's just me making posters, putting them up in the neighborhood. Others who are in the neighborhood who will recognize or who will see the poster, they will suddenly know that they're not alone, or that there are people that they don't know that are in their neighborhood that share their political ideas. So that's also a way of getting people to want to create community, because there's someone else who thinks like me, and that's maybe I'll bump into them one day or whatever. So the person who's putting up these posters or who's doing the graffiti or whatever might eventually organize an event in an alley or in somewhere else on the street or in a little small park or something, and that the person who saw it might go, and then these contacts are created. So that's a process of creating community using art, using like symbols of art and stuff like that. So I guess that's what I'd have to add.